And now let's discuss the latest updates on the front line and the possible date of the ending of the war with Ambassador John Bolton, who served as National Security Advisor under former President Donald Trump. Hello and welcome.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with discussing the situation on the front line. So you might know that the situation in Soledar and Bakhmut, which are in the Donetsk region, are extremely difficult. So what should the Ukrainian troops do to knock down Russians out there?
Well, I think what we need overall that would be helpful, not just in that particular battle, but more generally, is to have a strategy to achieve the objective we all want, which is the removal of all the Russian troops. And I'm afraid that from the U.S. and NATO perspective, we have not contributed the strategic picture that would be very helpful. So in the immediate struggle now, I think on the battlefield, it's going to be difficult for the next several months because the Russians are dug in. So what that tells me is we need to appreciate on a big picture basis what additional weapons assistance the Ukrainian forces need, and not debate week by week by week, this weapon, that weapon, the next weapon. What's the strategy to win? That's what we should focus on, and then deliver the weapons accordingly.
Thank you. Ambassador John Bolton is with Spotlight Ukraine, and my next question is about Russia's strategy. So we know that Russia continues its mobilization, and we know that Russia continues to build up its forces, and some military experts say that Russia is preparing an attack on Kyiv or on the western regions to cut the artery of aid from the west. So how do you think, how realistic these plans are?
Well, I think that's certainly possible. I'd say two things. Number one, I think right now Putin and the Kremlin are going to try and focus on politics and diplomacy to split the Western alliance. I think they recognize their military's performance has been appallingly bad. Ukraine's has been superb. And that Putin now hopes to win diplomatically what he can't win on the battlefield, splitting NATO, as I say, and we must guard against that. But second, and I would say this to everyone in Ukraine, this recent decision by Putin to name Valery Gerasimov as their new field commander in this war is very significant, and means we're in for some, I think, very difficult times ahead here. Gerasimov was Putin's pick to be, in effect, the chairman of their Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he's now said to Gerasimov, you're getting out from behind your desk and you're going to go win the war in Ukraine. Putin is, as we say, doubling down. He's pushing all of his chips to the center of the table. He will not be able to lay off responsibility for failure in Ukraine on anybody else. This is now his regime on the line. And maybe it was already, but he is making it clear he's not backing off anything. There is no negotiated settlement in sight here.
Oh, yeah, I see. Thank you. Donald Trump has repeatedly called for a reduction of the U.S. aid to Ukraine. So if he would still be the president of the United States, would it be good for Russia or for Ukraine?
Well, it would be very good for Russia, and I think that the NATO alliance would have been weakened and might have provided much less assistance to Ukraine. So it's fortunate for the United States and for Ukraine that Trump was defeated in 2020. I don't think he has a chance of becoming the Republican nominee in 2024. I think there are many other people who are potential candidates. And I think his influence within the Republican Party continues to diminish. There are isolationists in the Republican Party, as there are in the Democratic Party, but on both sides, they remain a small minority, and the overwhelming majority of American people, whatever their party affiliation, continue to support assisting Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you from Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian nation to all the Americans for your support. In one of your interviews, you said that if Putin authorizes the use of nuclear weapon, he is going to be a legitimate military target. Has this message been heard in Kremlin?
Well, I don't know. I do my best to say it every time I get a chance. He is the ultimate commander of the Russian military forces. The use of nuclear weapons is a military decision. Putin would be a legitimate target, and he should be. And the reason I stress the personal responsibility is that we need to be looking for ways to deter Putin from using the nuclear weapon. And I think his own risk is the best deterrent that I can think of.
We all know that Putin will not stop invading and Ukraine will not stop defeating itself. So how long will the war last? Because some experts say it can be end till the midsummer of 2023. Some others say that the war can last for like a couple of years.
Yeah, well, we not only want to win this war, we want it with minimal additional damage to Ukraine. It's not enough to say we'll win someday. The objective should be to minimize casualties, to minimize further damage. So this goes to the point that I was trying to make a minute ago. You need a strategy to link your strategic objectives, restoration of full sovereignty and territorial integrity, with the resources that you have to achieve those objectives, and to do it in a timely fashion. I think that we have a collective problem here in not doing that effectively. That doesn't mean we're going to announce all of it publicly. We're not going to tell the Russians what the details of the strategy are. But if we had a better plan, then we wouldn't go through this constant exercise of the government of Ukraine saying, well, we'd like this weapon and that weapon and the other weapon, and the White House saying, well, maybe yes, maybe no. Let's decide what our plan is, and then find the resources necessary to fit the plan to achieve the objectives. That would have the effect of winning the war more quickly and reducing the military and civilian casualties for Ukraine and the damage that's being done to the infrastructure of the country.
And in terms of the plans and the strategy, don't you think that West is a bit slow in giving its support to Ukraine because Russia is mobilizing much faster than we are ready to protect our country?
Well, time is on the side of Russia. That's part of the problem. That's why there has to be more of a sense of urgency coming from the West. Russia's 4 times bigger than Ukraine. Yeah. It's true that Western sanctions have hurt Russia. Its gross national product maybe down 10% this year, but Ukraine's was down 40%. And in a battle of attrition, that benefits Russia. We don't want to fight that kind of war. And so the way to put maximum pressure on Russia is to make it clear that we're not prepared to fight indefinitely. We're prepared to fight to win sooner rather than later, obviously in a prudent, carefully planned way. But that's what we need to apply more attention to, not every week debating weapon system A versus weapon system B.
Yeah, I see. Can Ukraine retake its whole territory till the end of 2023? Is it possible?
Well, it seems to me that it is possible. The Russian military performance across all of its combat arms has defied prediction. Certainly, it doesn't show anything like what Western intelligence thought the outcome would be at the beginning of the war. Ukrainian performance by all elements of the military has been outstanding. I will say on our part, we've provided extensive intelligence and equipment and weapons and ammunition, and we're pleased to do it to help Ukraine win, because a Ukrainian victory is an American and NATO victory as well. And to try to explain to people around the world, this is not just a European war. This really is a world war at this stage. So tomorrow in Washington, the relatively new Prime Minister of Japan, Kishida, will meet with President Biden. Japanese have provided assistance to Ukraine, something that's really unprecedented. We've seen South Korea selling weapons to Poland. They understand what the threat of Russian aggression means. They're very close to it on the Asian side of Russia. So the attention of the world really is focused here, and to utilize that attention to maximum effect, we need to try and win this war and show that Russia's aggression has failed. And if we show that lesson, it will tell something to the Russians and tell something to the Chinese in Asia and elsewhere in the world.
Yeah. Let's imagine if you served as national security advisor under the President Volodymyr Zelensky, What would be your strategy? What would be your advice?
Well, I think he did an outstanding job, I will say, in his speech to Congress. And I think it won a lot of credit for Ukraine and its people. And I think overwhelmingly, as I say, Americans sympathize with Ukraine. He needs to keep doing it. I know he's got a country to govern in wartime conditions, but this is a coalition effort in effect, and it's just a reality of political life that it takes a lot of time and attention, especially to counter Putin's efforts to break Western solidarity, which is not as strong as some people think it is. And I think participation by everybody in the Ukraine government, including from Parliament, and their visits around Europe and the United States are very helpful. And I would hope President Zelensky would press NATO and the White House in particular to develop this kind of strategy that I'm talking about. Obviously, we would do it in full cooperation with Ukraine. If we're all on the same page, it makes it a lot easier to get everybody to do their part.
So what can actually change the situation on the ground right now? More HIMARS, more Western tanks, or not just Patriots, or we're not just talking about the weapons itself, we're talking about the strategy. What can change the ground?
Well, in the Donbass region now, as southern Ukraine generally, the Russians are heavily dug in. Their fortifications are strong. As I said earlier, putting Valery Gerasimov in charge of the struggle shows how determined the Russians are. So we need to think of ways to break through the Russian defenses without fighting this like it's World War I. And I think one way you do this to avoid trench warfare and the very high casualties that we've already seen associated with that during the past 11 months is to continue to strike Russian supply areas behind the lines, including in Russia, and debilitate their ability to defend their perimeter. And I think that ought to be a high priority.
Yeah, I see. Thank you. And the last question. So if Putin pushes the nuclear button, will we enter the World War III?
Well, I don't think he's going to do that. I think he's been bluffing.
But if he just imagine, if he just pushes this button.
Well, I think it would be a catastrophic event for Russia because there would be no doubt whether he used a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine or against a NATO country. We would not let that go unanswered, and I think the response should be very devastating. I think that is Vladimir Putin signing his own death warrant at that point.
He'd better never doing this. Thank you so much for being the guest of the Spotlight Ukraine, and on behalf of all the Ukrainians, thank you for your support and the support of all the Americans. Ambassador John Bolton, who served as National Security Advisor under former President Donald Trump, was the guest of Spotlight Ukraine, and we continue. Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Latest news, trends, and analytics on all about Ukraine. Like, share, and subscribe. Any questions, proposals, and comments, contact us via email.